A majority of UK students think there should be a compulsory test on understanding sexual consent at the start of university, according to a survey. The Higher Education Policies Institute survey found that 58% of students back the idea of having to pass a test to show they fully understand consent. Universities have faced warnings about sexual harassment on campus. Let's speak with Edward Wilson, Managing Officer at Consent. Edward, good afternoon to you. I mean, I can hear a lot of people listening to this saying, hang on a second, what's gone wrong here? People used to go to university, they would party, they'd drink beer, they'd meet somebody, they might have a bit of a licentious time, they'd sleep with somebody they wish they hadn't slept with. It was all part of being a student. And now we need a consent form. What's happening?
Well, a lot of things are happening simultaneously. First of all, this is coming from the students themselves. So 60% of students say that they are not confident in knowing what consent is. And you've said yourself that 60% of students want more consent classes. So this is something they're asking for, and that very much fits in with the existing research.
How do you get to 18 and not know what consent is?
Well, we're 12 years now into reduction in school funding. So we've had a massive scaling back in PSHE, and so therefore we're getting less of this in school. As universities move more towards a for-profit model, they're putting less time into teaching things which are not just the courses. So a lot of different things are meaning that we're talking about less as a society. This is against a background of an increase in sexual violence.
Is this an increase, or do we now have, not to diminish anything here, Edward, but do we now have, thankfully, more people coming forward to report sexual violence?
I think both are happening simultaneously. So while it is the case that reporting is going up, I do a lot of work with police officers across the country, and they report that what they're seeing is a mild increase in sexual assault and sexual violence in general.
I mean, you might be forgiven for thinking, hang on, most of these guys, 18, 19, 20, that sort of age group, have grown up in a world where there has never been more discussion about what consent is. There's never been more highlighted issues about sexual violence or sexual assault in any kind of respect, whether you're reading it on social media, whether you're watching stories on daytime TV, whether you're hearing politicians stand up in Parliament, whether you're watching the themes of certain dramas and films and soap operas. We've never had more information about this than the world we currently live in.
Well, that is true, but that doesn't mean that people fully understand it. And again, I would refer you to the fact that this is the students themselves saying that they want more education.
In what form would that take? I mean, I'm not disputing what students say they want, but this would be what, a set of questions where you say, yes, I understand what consent is, and therefore I've now ticked that particular box. Is that essentially what it is? A form of understanding?
I agree with your concern, certainly. Our charity's done a lot of research, and what we found, and this fits with a lot of the research done by the Obama White House, is that having group conversations, getting people in a room, discussing what the social norms are, is far more important than just having some sort of tick box exercise, which I think can be used by institutions as just a fig leaf, say that we've done something and therefore we don't have to worry about it.
And could there be some students who almost mistake this as some kind of, I've done the consent form, therefore I'm good to go? I mean, is there a danger in that as well?
Yes, I think that there are a lot of people who just want to brush it under the carpet. So I think as a society, we don't really understand sexual violence very well, and that's being shown in the fact that the conviction rate for sexual violence has halved in the past 3 years. So in a lot of ways, we're getting worse at this, not better. And I think if you're a for-profit university, £9,000 a year for each student just trying to make money, you just want a little online tick box thing, which is why our charities have trouble at times getting in and doing the actual sort of education, which makes differences to how people perceive it.
When you say conviction rates have halved, I mean, could that be, and again, I want to be careful how I phrase this, and I'll give you some background as to why I ask this, but could it be because boys aren't committing these offences in the same kind of way, that minor indiscretions or somebody being asked out on a date or flirted with are all being conflated into this story. And if you ask people, have you been subjected in some form to any kind of sexual advance that you didn't want? I mean, that might be that you overheard a conversation that you thought was unsavory. It might be that in the student bar, a fellow student went in for a kiss when you didn't want one. I mean, when you throw that question to students, that could throw up those variables, of course. And the reason that I have this kind of, it's not about suspicion, it's incredulity, if I'm honest, Edward, because if I ever do a phone-in about anything around this, I could have a switchboard full of young guys who say, you know, we don't even like to talk to girls now because we're scared witless that something might happen. Very much against the grain of what you're suggesting here. So could it be that actually sexual violence has gone down, but we're counting perhaps the wrong things here?
I think that narrative would be very convenient for you to believe because it would allow you to not engage with the problem. It's certainly not what the data says. It's not what the police are saying.
You'd still engage with the problem, but you'd engage where the problem is rather than where the problem isn't.
Well, the problem seems to be that sexual violence is increasing. That's what the data shows.
But convictions for it have halved.
Yes, because as a society, and I think especially under the Conservative government, there is less of an emphasis in reducing sexual violence. I think it's something that we are caring about less as a society, not more. I agree with you.
I don't know anybody who doesn't care about sexual violence. I think anybody would, wouldn't they? That's a very serious offence.
It is, but it's one that we don't really understand much as a society. I mean, most people don't actually know what rape is. Most people couldn't give you a confident idea about what consent is, especially when drugs and alcohol.
Most people don't know what rape is.
Can you define rape?
Well, I would define rape of essentially, in its broadest form, of attempting to have sex with somebody without their consent and possibly even with the use of force as well. That, to me, would be rape, wouldn't it?
That's not even close to what the definition is under UK law.
Okay.
And that's fine. Most people don't
understand
it.
Tell me what rape is under UK law, because I think that would be useful to know.
It is the non-consensual insertion of a penis into somebody else. So
it's kind of what I said, isn't it?
No, it's nothing close to what you said. You
trying to have sex with somebody against their will?
Yeah, it's not about trying to have sex, and against their will isn't something which is under UK law. It's about consent. So you yourself don't really understand it. But that's fine. Most people don't. But
I mean, you said it's nothing like it. I mean, it was very much like what I just described was very much like the official definition.
Well, you also slipped in use of force. And
potentially use of force, yes.
The majority of sexual violence is non-violent in the sense that nobody's pinning anybody down and there isn't any physical violence happening. But again, there is a narrative that only sexual violence which involves the use of force should be counted, which is, again, very convenient for those people who are trying.
I mean, we're all aware of, I was reading a report today about people, partners who have woken up with their partner having sex with them, which is also an act of rape if there was no consent involved there as well. So no violence. I mean, I think most people understand that there are varying forms, but in its broadest sense, I think we all get what rape is.
I disagree. And I've been doing this for a decade. I've taught thousands of people.
But you just read back to me more or less what I said to you. When you said I didn't understand, more or less what I said to you. I might not have used
something that's, in my view, substantially different. Now, you may view the two sentences as being similar. I've worked in this area for a long time.
You don't have sex with somebody who hasn't said you can have sex with them, right?
Again, it is more complicated than that.
You don't try to penetrate somebody in whatever area if you don't have permission for that and consent for that to happen.
I mean, that's a very basic understanding of it, but
yeah. I'd say that's probably about as reasonable an understanding, is it not? We all know that. Nobody would not know that.
But you keep asserting we all know that, and yet the students disagree with that statement. The data disagrees with that statement. So I don't see why
you think students go to university, and there are some of them who do not know that trying to insert your penis into another human being against their will is not right? You think there are some students who don't know that?
Yes, I've met literally hundreds of students who think that, for example, having sex with people who are asleep is okay. They think that oral isn't rape. Uh,
But even if they didn't know that was rape, they would know it was wrong, surely, and criminally wrong.
I mean, you yourself have talked in your book about what social media is doing to people's brains. And I think what we could talk about here is what pornography is doing to people's brains. People have access to hardcore pornography from the age of 4 now.
Yep.
If you're watching that image of what sex is from a very young age,
it's interesting because I was going to raise that point, because I think that is an area we would absolutely agree on. That I can't imagine what kind of bad education, very negative and dangerous education young kids, young boys get from watching pornography, and perhaps their view of women. I understand that, but does it not still take a very specific kind of person to force themselves on somebody without consent? I mean, that's a whole different ballgame. Someone who's addicted to porn, that's something that needs dealing with and probably recalibrates everything about their kind of sexual clock, as it were, and what they think is something that would turn them on or not turn them on. It recalibrates that. But that's, again, it's still a big jump between raping somebody and having a proclivity to certain types of pornography.
Rape is a very unusual crime in that it is possible to rape somebody and not really realize you've done it. And when you speak to people who've perpetrated a lot of rape, a lot of it happens because they thought, well, they weren't that drunk, they seemed more interested than they were, etc., etc. It's very easy to give excuses, to not fully understand the damage that people do. And that's why having in-depth discussions about it and not just sort of hand-waving, say, well, everybody knows what rape is so important. Because if you spread the narrative that, oh, it's all drummed up, oh, everybody knows what rape is, only very evil people rape, then you're not actually addressing what the majority of rape is, which is often muddled and confusing, and people who haven't really ever considered it before they're having sex.
Edward, listen, I'm really glad you came on as well. It's an interesting discussion, and we have certainly put it out there for people to think about, which is, part of the point of these discussions. So thank you for that, Edward Wilson, Managing Officer at Consent.